Before the sun rises over the Merrimack River, before the first light touches the red brick walls of the Lowell mills, a bell shatters the dark. It is 4:30 in the morning, and for Eliza Hartwell, 17 years old, that sound is not an alarm. It is an order. She has been awake for several seconds already, the way people learn to be when they live under the constant threat of being late. Her eyes open to a ceiling she can barely see. The room is cold. Cold in the way that October in Massachusetts is cold when 6 girls share a space built for 4. And the fire downstairs has not yet been fed. She can hear the breathing of the others around her. Margaret, in the next cot, turns over without waking. Sarah, near the window, is already pulling on her stockings in the dark. They do not speak. There is an understanding between them that goes beyond words. Every minute spent talking is a minute that belongs to the Lowell Manufacturing Company. This is not a story about machines, though we will get to the machines. This is a story about a morning, a day, and a night in the life of a young woman in 1845. A young woman whose name you have never heard, whose face exists in no photograph, and whose hands helped build a country that would spend the next century arguing about whether her labor was ever truly worth the cost. The reconstruction you are about to hear is drawn from real sources: mill records, company ledgers, the diaries of women who worked these floors and somehow, impossibly, still found the energy to write about it afterward. Court testimonies, newspaper accounts, and the published letters of mill workers that circulated in a literary journal called the Lowell Offering, a magazine written entirely by factory girls, funded in part by the very company that employed them, a fact that was never quite as innocent as it appeared. From these fragments, we have assembled something as close to a true account as the historical record allows. What we cannot fully reconstruct is what it felt like. But we are going to try. Eliza came to Lowell from a farm in Vermont. This was not unusual. The mills of Lowell were built on the labor of young women from rural New England, and the company recruited them deliberately. Traveling agents called on farm families, promising wages, education, moral supervision, and the chance for a girl to earn her own money before marriage. The pitch was sophisticated for its time. Lowell was not presented as a factory town. It was presented as an experiment, a model city, proof that industrialization and virtue could coexist. Francis Cabot Lowell, who had smuggled the blueprints of British textile machinery out of England in his memory alone, had envisioned something unprecedented. A mill system run not on the backs of a permanent underclass, but on the temporary labor of respectable young women who would earn, save, improve themselves, and eventually return to their communities as better wives and citizens. The idea was remarkable. The execution was something else entirely. Eliza had been in Lowell for 8 months when our reconstruction begins, long enough to have lost the initial wonder she described in her first letter home, the astonishment at the brick buildings, the boardwalks, the sheer scale of it all. Long enough to have stopped noticing the bells, long enough to know exactly how many seconds she had between the 4:30 bell and the moment the mill gates closed, because the company docked her pay for every minute she was late, and Eliza was not here to lose money. She splashes water from the basin onto her face. The water is cold. She does not complain about this because there is no one to complain to and no time to complain in. She dresses in the dark with practiced efficiency, a skill she did not have 8 months ago, a skill that belongs entirely to this life and will be useless everywhere else. The dress is plain cotton, dark-colored to hide the lint. She pins her hair without a mirror. She does not need one anymore. Downstairs, Mrs. Hanson, the boarding housekeeper, has put out bread and a thin porridge. The meal is included in the weekly deduction from Eliza's wages. She eats standing up. She has learned to eat quickly, not because she enjoys it, but because her stomach needs something in it before the long walk and the longer morning, and there is no other time to eat until the bell rings for the half-hour dinner break at noon. She drinks from a cup of weak tea. She takes a piece of bread for her pocket. She does not say goodbye. The others are already moving. Outside, Lowell is dark and alive with footsteps. Hundreds of women are making the same walk through the same streets at the same hour, pouring from boarding houses and into the lamplight like a tide that has no choice about the direction it flows. The cobblestones are slick with October damp. The air smells of the river, cold water, wet stone, and beneath it, always, and the faint chemical sweetness of the mills themselves, the smell of machine oil and cotton fiber that clings to everything and everyone in this city, regardless of how far from the factory floor you stand. The Merrimack Manufacturing Company mill where Eliza works rises 5 stories from the canal bank. It is, by any measure of the era, an enormous building. The windows are numerous and evenly spaced, designed to maximize natural light during daylight hours, a practical decision that the company marketed as a sign of their concern for worker welfare. Because in 1845, the line between practical and humane was frequently drawn by whoever held the pen. Inside, on the weaving floor where Eliza works, there are rows of power loom machines stretching the full length of the building. Each loom is made of cast iron and oak. Each loom weighs more than 300 pounds. Each loom runs continuously from the moment the water wheel begins to turn until the moment it stops, which means the floor Eliza steps onto at 5 o'clock in the morning is already shaking. The sound is the thing that no written account fully prepares you for, even after 8 months. It is not loud the way a thunderstorm is loud. It is loud the way the ocean is loud. Omnidirectional, total. A sound that does not enter through the ears so much as occupy the entire body. The looms clatter and slam in a rhythm that never quite resolves into music, but never quite collapses into chaos. Workers shout to each other at distances of 3 feet and cannot always be understood. Many of the older women who have worked these floors for 3, 4, 5 years, have developed a permanent ringing in their ears that they describe in their letters as the sound of bells that will not stop even in sleep. Eliza is responsible for 4 looms. This is standard. Each weaver monitors multiple machines simultaneously, watching for broken threads, adjusting tension, rethreading shuttles with practiced speed. If a thread breaks and she does not catch it quickly, the finished cloth will have a flaw, and flawed cloth means a deduction from her weekly count. The job requires a particular kind of attention that is exhausting in a way that is difficult to explain. Not the exhaustion of heavy lifting, but the exhaustion of never being allowed to look away. For 12 hours, every sense is required to be oriented toward the machines. The moment your attention drifts is the moment something goes wrong. And the windows bring light by 6:30. By 7, Eliza has already been at her looms for 2 hours. The air on the weaving floor is managed by the company. Specifically, the humidity is kept artificially high. The windows are frequently kept closed even in summer, and the overseers sometimes spray water directly onto the floor, because humid air reduces the frequency of thread breaks, which increases productivity, which increases profit. What it also does is fill the air with a fine suspension of cotton fibers, lint so light that it floats like snow and settles on every surface, and enters the lungs of every person who breathes on that floor for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Workers call it fly. The older women cough it up at night. Physicians in the 1840s do not yet have a name for the condition this causes. Later generations will call it byssinosis, brown lung, a disease that takes years to develop and a lifetime to resolve, if it resolves at all. Eliza does not know any of this yet. She knows that she coughs more than she used to. She has attributed this to the change in climate from Vermont. At 7:30, there is a small collision of circumstance that tells us more about the social architecture of the mill than any document could. Eliza's loom on the far end of the row develops a problem with its shuttle, a minor mechanical fault that requires the assistance of the overseer, a man named Aldrich, who supervises the floor from an elevated position at the center of the room. To summon him, Eliza must raise her hand and wait. She waits for nearly 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, the loom produces 7 yards of cloth with a recurring flaw. When Aldrich arrives, he inspects the machine with the expression of a man who has been inconvenienced. He fixes the shuttle in under a minute. He does not apologize for the wait. He records the flawed yardage in a small ledger he keeps in his breast pocket. The deduction will appear in Eliza's wages on Friday. She watches him walk back to his station. She says nothing. There is nothing to say, and nowhere to say it. This is important to understand about the world of the Lowell mills. The machinery of grievance that existed in 1845 was not designed for the workers. The agents who recruited farm girls promised fair treatment, but the company's boarding house keepers reported on worker behavior. The overseers controlled pay deductions with near total discretion, and any worker who complained publicly, who circulated petitions, organized her co-workers, spoke to newspapers, risked being placed on a blacklist that was shared between mill companies across New England. A blacklisted worker could not find employment at any mill in the region. She would go home in shame and in poverty. The system was not accidental. Dependency was the product, as much as the cotton cloth. And yet, the noon bell rings, and something happens to the floor that Eliza has learned to look forward to more than anything else in the working day. Everyone stops. For 30 minutes, half an hour, measured and enforced with the same precision as every other interval in this place, the looms are still. The silence that follows is so sudden and so complete that new workers sometimes stand in it for several seconds before their bodies remember what stillness feels like. Eliza walks down the stairs and out into the mill yard, where the October air hits her like cold water, and she breathes in deeply, properly, for the first time since 5 in the morning. She eats her bread. She sits on a low stone wall with Margaret and Sarah, and they talk. This is the part of the day that the company did not design. These 30 minutes belong to the women, and they use them with the urgency of people who understand that time is the one resource that has been systematically taken from them. They talk about home. They talk about books. There is a circulating library accessible to mill workers, one of the genuine progressive achievements of the Lowell experiment, and many of the women read voraciously, borrowing volumes and passing them along the rows during the rare moments when the overseers look away. Eliza has been reading a novel. She tells Margaret about a passage she found particularly striking, mimicking the dialogue with enough precision that Margaret laughs. Really laughs. The kind of laugh that you forget is possible on a Tuesday morning when you have been standing for 7 hours. The bell rings at 12:30. They go back inside. The afternoon is harder than the morning. This is consistent across nearly every diary and letter from mill workers of the period. And the reason is physiological as much as psychological. By 2 o'clock, Eliza has been standing for 9 hours. Her feet ache with a persistence that has become ambient. She does not notice the pain so much as she moves within it, the way you stop noticing the weight of a coat you have been wearing all day. Her back aches, her ears ring. The air on the floor is warmer now, heated by the machines and the bodies, and the afternoon sun coming through the managed windows, and the cotton fiber seems thicker, more present, coating the back of her throat. At 3 o'clock, something happens that does not appear in any company record, but appears in the diaries of 3 separate workers in 1845, described in similar enough terms that we believe it to be a real and recurring phenomenon. A young girl on the far end of the floor, one of the newer workers, perhaps 14 years old, recently arrived from a farm near Concord, begins to cry, not dramatically, not loudly, just steadily, with her hands still moving on her loom, tears running down her face with the same involuntary mechanism as sweat. She does not stop working. She cannot afford to stop working. She just cries and works, until one of the older women near her reaches over during a shuttle change and briefly, silently, places her hand on the girl's arm. The gesture lasts perhaps 3 seconds. The girl stops crying. Nobody reports this to the overseer. Nobody marks it in a ledger. It disappears into the noise of the floor and leaves no record except in the memory of the women who were there. And in their diaries, when they write about it later that night by candlelight, they do not describe it as a moment of suffering. They describe it as a moment of grace. The final bell rings at 7 o'clock in the evening. 14 hours after Eliza first stepped into the street, the working day ends. The looms go quiet one by one as the water wheel's power is cut, and the silence comes back. And this time, it is the silence of something earned. The women file out through the same gates they entered through in the dark, and now there is light. Lamplight from the boarding houses, the faint amber glow of the mill windows cooling down, the deep blue of an October sky going fully dark above the Merrimack. Eliza walks back to Mrs. Hanson's. Dinner is served at 7:30, a proper meal this time, boiled vegetables and salt pork and more bread, eaten at a long table with the other boarders in a room that is warm and lit by 2 oil lamps. The conversation at dinner is the fullest conversation of the day. These women, some of whom have been together in this house for 2-3 years, know each other in the way that people know each other when they share a room and a table and a working day. They know who is saving for a brother's education. They know who is sending money to a widowed mother. They know who received a letter from home this week and who is still waiting for one that may never come. After dinner, there is a small window of freedom, small but real. The company curfew, enforced by the boarding house keepers, who are themselves employees of the mill, requires all workers to be inside by 10 o'clock. Between 8 and 10, some women attend the lectures and evening classes offered by the Lowell Institute. Some go to church meetings. Some simply sit in the common room and do nothing at all, which is itself a radical act in a life structured to allow no idle moment. Eliza sits at the small writing desk in the corner of the room she shares with 5 others and opens a notebook. She writes, "This is who she is outside of the mill. This is the version of Eliza Hartwell that the company did not recruit, did not measure, did not account for in any ledger." She writes about what she saw today: the crying girl, the sound of the looms coming to life in the dark, the way the river looked at noon when she was briefly allowed to look at it. She writes with the cramped, urgent handwriting of someone who has too many words for too little time. In 1845, the Lowell Offering, the journal written by mill workers, publishes fiction, poetry, essays, and letters from women who work exactly these hours under exactly these conditions. Several of these writers become, in later years, among the most active voices in the American labor movement. The 10-hour workday they campaigned for will not be written into Massachusetts law until 1874. Most of them will have left Lowell long before then. Eliza does not know any of this. She only knows that after 14 hours inside the noise of the mill, the act of putting words on paper is the quietest, most self-determined thing she can do. The candle burns low. The other women drift towards sleep. Margaret says something soft in the dark, and Eliza answers, and then there is no more talking. She closes her notebook. She is asleep before the candle goes out. Tomorrow the bell will ring at 4:30. The river will still be dark. The looms will be waiting. But tonight, in the few hours that belong entirely to her, Eliza Hartwell existed on her own terms. She ate and laughed and wrote and rested. She was a young woman, not a unit of production. She was someone whose inner life was complex and private and entirely her own, untouchable by any overseer or company ledger or blacklist. The mill took 12 hours of her day. It did not take the rest. And that remainder, stubborn, small, human, is the most radical thing in this entire story. In the years that followed 1845, the Lowell mill system would change dramatically. Immigration brought new waves of workers willing to accept even lower wages. The paternalistic boarding house system collapsed. The working hours grew longer before they grew shorter. The women who had written in the Lowell Offering organized, petitioned. She walked off the floor in some of the earliest industrial strikes in American history. They were called unsophisticated, ungrateful, hysterical. They were called girls, always girls, regardless of their age. Some of what they demanded took generations to achieve. Some of it we are still arguing about now. If the history of labor has a sound, it is not the sound of speeches or legislation. It is the sound of a bell ringing before dawn, and the sound of footsteps on a cobblestone street, and the sound of someone, in the small hours before sleep, picking up a pen. If you found yourself moved by this story, if something in Eliza's day resonated with questions you carry about work, dignity, and what we owe each other, leave a comment below. These reconstructions exist because of people who believe that the voices history overlooked are worth hearing. If you want to keep listening, subscribe. There are more stories waiting. The Merrimack still runs through Lowell. The mill buildings still stand, most of them, converted now into museums and apartments and offices. On certain mornings, when the light comes off the river at a particular angle and the air is cold the way October air gets cold in Massachusetts, you can almost feel it. The weight of the hours those walls once held. The accumulated labor of thousands of women whose names we will never fully recover. Women who worked and wrote and organized and dreamed. Women who were, before they were anything the company needed them to be, simply alive.